The political rose between the two industrial thorns is Martin Ferguson this morning. Martin is best known to the energy and resources industry for his time as a minister in the Labor government. And I think for me, the greatest reflection I saw on his time as minister was shortly after he had announced his stepping down from that position, when one of the energy ministers in one of the states, namely Victoria, giving a speech at a conference, who comes from the other side of politics, spent the first 5 minutes of his speech talking about what an amazing job Martin had done positively in developing the resources portfolio in that government. And now he's taken up a series of roles within industry. In particular, Martin is the chair of the advisory board to the industry association that represents the oil and gas industry in this country. He's also a non-executive director of BG Group. But you'd also know from your notes for this event, Honourable Martin Ferguson AM. Martin was given that position back in 1996, I think it was, when he was recognised for his contribution to working Australians, because before he entered politics, his previous career had been very strongly with the Labor movement in this country. But now he's in a position to be able to provide some comments and in particular perspectives given that diverse background. So please join me in welcoming Martin Ferguson.
Well, thanks very much, Tony, Roy, ladies and gentlemen. I will make a few comments because, in my own opinion, the sooner we get into Q&A, the better in terms of the interaction between the panellists and the audience. In many ways, I want to reinforce the issues raised by Roy, but also broaden the focus not just from gas to other energy sources that Australia is endowed with. And I can remember the original cabinet discussion about Australia pursuing membership of the G20. And the focus was on Australia as a potential energy superpower. And that speaks for itself, because obviously Roy has touched on the importance of LNG from an export potential. With the full operation of Pluto, we have gone from 20 to 24 million tonnes per year, and by the time we bring in additional 12 trains at about 2016-17, we'll be about 75 million tonnes per year. Potentially the largest exporter of LNG in the world. An investment of $200 billion that has been secured starting on the west coast, but also extending to the Northern Territory and on the east coast over the last 6 to 7 years. But Roy also touched on the fact there's potentially about another 180 to 200 billion sitting out there based on the demand figures that he addressed. And the challenge to Australia from a gas point of view is to actually improve our competitiveness. It also is the same challenge across the minerals and resources sector generally. I refer to the fact that yes, LNG is important, but Roy also spoke of the fact that the world is looking for affordable energy. We're not the biggest producer of coal, but we have in recent times been the biggest exporter of coal. As the IEA reinforced last week at a meeting in Paris on Monday, there is still a huge demand for coal. The truth of the matter is that coal is actually going to become far cheaper in terms of affordable, reliable source of energy in Australia, because of the huge jump in gas prices, which speak for themselves, but also the fact we won't have a carbon price, and in my opinion, the renewable energy target will be appropriately frozen at a real 20%, which was the real intention of the government at the time, 20% of energy. But the truth is that demand forecasts have actually been revised substantially. For a variety of reasons, energy demand in Australia is down, reflecting the restructure of the Australian economy, but also the fact that with the huge increases in the price of electricity as a result of investment in the networks, the poles and wires, the Australian community and households have responded far more than we thought in terms of their elasticity of the response with respect to the use of energy because of the higher prices. In terms of coal, we have still got huge opportunities. There is a climate change debate, but the truth of the matter is nations such as India and China are focused on reliable supply of energy at the most affordable cost, because they aspire to the same standard of living for us as us. And obviously in terms of major cities such as Beijing and Shanghai, there's a place for LNG. It's not a debate about climate change, it's a debate about quality of life and a huge middle class who now expects their government to actually focus on improvement in quality of life in terms of the difficulties they've got from an environmental point of view in those cities. In other cities throughout the Asian region, they'll also be looking to us for coal. I can also say that we got the third largest known resources of uranium in the world. And I know from my own engagement, ongoing basis with the US administration as a minister, the manner in which we have engaged with India in recent times following the leadership of the United States and opening up our capacity to export uranium to India, subject to them concluding an appropriate bilateral with Australia, is also very much welcome from an alliance point of view. Having said that, can I also say that, in my opinion, we should continue to invest in renewables. Solar energy in Australia is going to be on par with coal-fired power very shortly. Because of improvements through innovation, research and development, and being honest, the large breakthroughs in terms of China's manufacturing capacity, which have very much reduced the cost of installation, for example, in solar power in Australian homes. We as a nation, as we go forward in the 21st century, shouldn't just be focused on the export of our raw commodities. We should also be investing in technology innovation. We won't win manufacturing opportunities because of our high cost of wages, our high standard of living. But we should be investing in innovation in terms of opening up new export opportunities, be it in renewables, or might I also say, in terms of our capacity in the mining industry. What keeps us competitive is not just our productivity in terms of the capacity of the workforce, but also our investment in mineral services and petroleum services. In that context, I can also say, as we go forward in terms of the development of our LNG sector, the next phase of investment, floating LNG is going to be exceptionally important to Australia. Prelude is under construction in the Samsung yard in South Korea at the moment. Browse goes ahead as we think it will. There's potentially another 3 LNG floating facilities. I know it brings a wry smile to Roy's face because as a competitor, he's more focused on onshore developments, such as Gorgon, where he's got 3 trains and 2 at Wheatstone with a potential, I think, for about another 5 trains. So I like the competitive tension between major investors, such as Chevron, Woodside, ConocoPhillips, Exxon, etc., and also complement Exxon and its achievements with Santos and other investors in terms of the development of the PNG project. So, ladies and gentlemen, can I say, in the context of our alliance with the United States, we have had a serious engagement with the government, and I must say, when Secretary Clinton was here late in 2012, the time I spent with her was totally focused on the energy debate. And to give her credit from a State Department point of view, the appointment of Carlos Pascual, the ambassador, really lifted the engagement from an Australia-US point of view over the last 6 to 7 years from an energy perspective, with it being reinforced to Australia by the US administration, that they see Australia as a major energy superpower, but also a huge responsibility in the region in which we live to remain attractive for investment, and in doing so to be able to source energy at the most affordable cost to meet the needs and aspirations of the neighbourhood in which we live. And that meant our historic partners, our long-time friends such as Japan, South Korea, but also our new friends in places such as China, and also the possibilities of developing further export opportunities in places such as India. So I simply say that we have been very lucky over the last few years because of the huge investment we've attracted. Our challenge and responsibility now is to come to terms with our competitiveness, to attract that second wave of investment, and in doing so ensure our own prosperity and opportunities for the future, but also be able to assist other nations who are less fortunate than us in terms of energy security, be able to grow their own economies to our benefit and their benefit. I thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning.
Our third speaker and panellist this morning is Ian Kemish. Ian is currently Strategic Advisor Asia Pacific for ExxonMobil. He didn't join ExxonMobil in 1981. Ian has a very different background. Many of you would be aware, particularly the Australians in the audience, he has an extraordinarily distinguished career in foreign affairs. In particular, he was High Commissioner to Papua New Guinea quite recently, and has a number of other international postings in the diplomatic field. In 2002, Ian was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia for his contribution to Australia's response to the Bali bombings, and that was again, the Australians in the audience would be aware of a very difficult time for both Australia and that country, and so Ian took a very significant role representing Australia in the region. But this morning he's going to present his perspective representing ExxonMobil on some of the issues we've touched upon, and then join us on the panel. Please welcome Ian Kemish.
Thanks, Tony. I look across the room at my former colleagues from Foreign Affairs and Trade, and I say to you, it's been less than 12 months since I left, and already I'm being referred to as an industrial thorn by Tony Wood. It's great to be here on the same dais as Chevron. Chevron is not only a competitor, it's also a partner for ExxonMobil, including importantly at Gorgon, where we are a 25% co-venturer with Chevron. ExxonMobil has other interests in Australia, which I'll come to, but they include another potential investment in LNG and LNG export at Scarborough. Now, I don't want to repeat a lot of what others have said. Indeed, I just want to pick up on some of the points that others have made. Roy has spoken very well about growth in energy demand globally and in the Asia-Pacific, about the centrality of the Asia-Pacific to global demand, and the rapidly growing importance of natural gas as part of the overall energy mix. Our projections accord entirely with everything that Roy just said. I will advertise, I just would highlight that ExxonMobil has for 50 years published an outlook for energy through a 40-year period. Our 2014 outlook is relatively recent. It guides our decisions, our investment decisions, as one of the world's largest companies, so we very much believe in it. I do want to pick up on one particular point that Roy made and emphasise it. LNG projects are in the process of development or are reaching production all around the world. In Australia, in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, in the deep water off East Africa, in Far Eastern Russia, and importantly in the US Gulf Coast region. Now, just in passing, I'd say that the emergence of the US on the export scene and how that'll bear on the regional market is, as Roy's also said, something that's attracted a lot of discussion. My own quick view is that it's much more complex than is sometimes held to be in the popular media, at least. There are many factors at play here. When we consider the key market in this region, China, there are so many other things. The extent to which pipeline gas will become part of the mix, potential for domestic development, and other regional suppliers. The other point I'd make in passing about that debate is that you might expect a coming together of the US Henry Hub-based market and the regional LNG market, but one would need to be cautious in that analysis. I think there's a key point here, and that is that as long as the laws of economics remain in place, the cost of supply will be a determining factor in setting price. And frankly, it's more expensive to supply LNG than it is to pipe gas within the United States. But look, there is, as I say, a change underway, development of new projects. One of them, as Martin has generously pointed out, is our project in Papua New Guinea. And I do want to say some things about that. I've been encouraged by the organisers to do so, but in any case, I need no encouragement. We're very proud and pleased with where we have got to in neighbouring Papua New Guinea. The project formally commenced at the end of 2009 with FID, and we're delighted that less than 5 years later, it's come in on time, on budget, and that the first cargo has now been delivered to Japan. We're embarked on a project that will see 6.9 million tonnes of LNG per year exported from Papua New Guinea. It's a project that will involve 9 trillion cubic feet of gas over an estimated 30-year period. It's a significant development in the region. Now, my time as Australian High Commissioner to Papua New Guinea coincided with, almost directly, with the project construction phase. And as the representative of Papua New Guinea's most significant and consistent development partner, I was conscious that I was working alongside a major industry partner involved in a nation-changing project. Like others, including in ExxonMobil, I had my moments wondering whether the project would succeed amidst the extraordinarily complex logistical, political and community-related challenges that were thrown us along the way. We can now look back at a major project execution achievement of which we are rightly proud. It involved the building of a 700-kilometre pipeline across some of the world's toughest geography to the LNG plant near Moresby, which in itself is a significant construction achievement. We built an airfield in the centre of the Highlands capable of taking 88 Antonov deliveries of heavy and sensitive equipment. And I'm told, here's a statistic for you, that work involved our haul trucks travelling the equivalent of 32 trips around the Earth. It's also, of course, a matter of pride for the PNG government and people, including the 9,000 Papua New Guineans whom we employed. Stakeholder engagement was important there, as you can imagine. It's important and vital to any successful resorts project globally, including here in Australia. I won't dwell on that. Happy to talk about it under Q&A if necessary or of interest. So we have projects emerging around the region. I wouldn't highlight Papua New Guinea particularly as a competitor for Australia. The situation's broader than that. It's worth, however, noting what's happened there. But what about domestic needs? Some might ask, what about domestic supply? How do you balance export imperatives with domestic requirements? This is something that's obviously discussed within the United States and here in Australia, and I want to leave a couple of thoughts on the table about it. I should quickly note that we, for our part, through our affiliate SO Australia, have shown our commitment to domestic supply in this country since the 1960s, where we have evolved to the point where we supply 40% of East Coast domestic gas from our offshore production facilities in the Bass Strait. We're actually in the process, by the way, of making an additional total of $5.5 billion investment in that development. That'll deliver an extra 1.6 TCF to the market. But I say that in passing just to establish credentials. On this question of domestic requirements versus export imperatives, we frankly think you can't go wrong if you support the principles of free trade, allowing the market to determine the flow of goods, capital and resources, including energy. Reserving a proportion of supply for domestic consumption runs against those principles, but more than that, it's counterproductive. The objective should be to increase energy supply for all. You don't achieve that by locking up reserves, domestic reservation, or restricting onshore exploration, and thereby creating conditions that discourage investment in the sector. Policies should facilitate development and make a contribution to promoting investment and expanding the overall pie. Finally, some quick thoughts on climate change. Perhaps that'll help generate discussion as well. Two things are clear about climate change from our perspective. One is that the risk is clear and that it warrants action. The second is that all energy sources are going to be necessary to meet future global energy demand growth as society manages the risk of climate change. All credible forecasts predict that carbon-based fuels will continue to meet about 3/4 of global demand through to 2040. But there's three quick things to focus on when it comes to climate change. Gains in energy efficiency mean that global energy demand will grow at a much slower pace than economic growth. While global demand global GDP is expected to almost treble by 2040. Demand is expected to grow by only 35%, and it's energy efficiency that is responsible for the delta between those two things. Second, I would say that changes in energy supply, the energy supply mix, will make a very important contribution, and that natural gas lies at the centre of that. If you look at the experience and prospects in the world's two largest economies, in the US and China, where changes to the energy supply mix have a real chance of making a difference globally, you see that in the US, very significant emission reductions have been achieved in the absence of overarching prescriptive emissions policy, and that this has been a direct function of the gas revolution that Roy referred to earlier, and the consequent conversion of power plants to natural gas. And in China, concern about local pollution levels, we believe, is a significant political driver. And there have been clear signs of an intention to retire suboptimal brown and black coal-fired power generation plants and change the energy mix over time to include a greater proportion of natural gas. We expect that between now and 2040, the use of natural gas in China will grow enormously. And as a consequence of these kinds of changes, we expect to see worldwide energy emissions plateauing around 2030 and then declining through to 2040. That's enough, I think, for the moment. Look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, so you've got three different perspectives from people with very diverse backgrounds, and now we've got deliberately allowed quite a bit of time for discussion and Q&A, and let's see how we proceed. I guess I was interested in just maybe to start the conversation going is to pick up that last theme that Ian raised. I noted Roy's comment in relation to the injection of CO2 in the Gorgon project, and there was the Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, whichever many of you may have come across, was reported through The Economist back in December that across a large number of the major resource companies operating and based in the United States, of 29 of those, in terms of thinking about how they managed risk, had an internal carbon price. And interestingly, ExxonMobil was at the top of the range, using a forward carbon price of $60 a tonne. So I guess without getting into the particular issues of what would be the appropriate political side, I guess I'm interested in how you think that interface between the need of many parts of the developing economies to maintain growth, economic growth, social development, and therefore the projections of use of coal and gas, at the same time, at some point, where the continuing use of coal and gas becomes inconsistent with addressing the sort of aspirations that many countries have put on the table for climate change. Now, how do you think about that as this plays out over the next few years in terms of the strategic decisions that are being made by companies? And Martin, how do you think it might play out in relation to the sort of role that industries and governments might take to this? So, Roy, do you want to start with that?
Well, I guess that's a tough question, but let me start by saying, as I said in my opening comments, is that we think the world is going to need all forms of affordable energy. Now that includes renewables. I mean, we have renewables in our energy mix, and we think it's a good complement to our core strengths. Now, having said that, there's kind of three legs to this stool. I mean, if you're a country, I'm assuming when we look at it, we're looking at, there's energy security, which is an element that needs to be considered. There's certainly carbon management that needs to be considered when you're selecting a fuel. And there's also the economic realities, of is it create jobs? Is it a job enhancer? Is it a job killer? Does it promote the economy? Does it not promote the economy? These are all the considerations that I think that a lot of countries and companies are kind of at the crossroads at. They're trying to balance, in my view, those issues. But let me reiterate that there is a role, and the role could be as significant as the reality allows it for renewable energy. And I also might add that, and I think Ian touched on it, is natural gas, when you look at the energy mix, is a great transitional fuel from, say, a an oil-based, coal-based fuel to, say, a renewable situation, and the fact that it complements the renewable energy. In other words, you can throttle natural gas power plants a little bit easier than you can throttle, say coal plants to accommodate the cyclic nature of, say, either solar or wind or wave conversion. So, those are, some of the benefits of natural gas. Maybe I'll pause there.
Martin?
Nearly every company I dealt with in terms of investment in Australia actually had factored in internally a price on carbon. And that's about proper risk management in terms of who knows where the climate change debate is going to end up. Putting that aside, as Roy says, countries are looking for the most affordable, reliable supply of energy. And be it gas, coal, uranium, renewables or whatever. But as we go forward too, both industry and governments are actually focused on technology and reducing emissions. And I must say, only a matter of about 4 or 5 weeks ago, the coal industry had a major discussion here in Canberra that I was part of, both local and some international players, in terms of our requirement to pay more attention to the issue of technology. And Gorgon is the largest commercial deployment of carbon capture and storage in the use. In China, it's a different debate. It's not just about storage, it's actually about use. So you approach it from a different point of view because they're also looking at how you commercialise the CO2. As we go forward, our responsibility is not only to develop our resources and export them, but also have a major commitment with industry. And there was a serious engagement on an ongoing basis, for example, between Australia and the US and like-minded countries on technology from a CO2 perspective. And we established a global carbon capture and storage unit, which still operates in Victoria now, as part of the initiatives of the Rudd government, because we thought as a major coal exporter we had a primary responsibility to work with industry and invest in technology and a variety of pilot programs around the world. So I simply say, yes, there is a carbon debate. But technology created the problem. In my opinion, technology will solve the problem, and both industry and government, especially in the OECD world, have got to lead that debate and make the necessary breakthroughs. Then it will be commercialised, just like floating LNG. The first floating LNG plant being built by Prelude is a challenge. The second, third and fourth are going to be much easier.
Ian?
I agree with all that. I spoke about some of the things that may help in addressing climate change, but of course, I take it as read, but should actually also say that government policies develop and emerge, and they too will be an important part of the mix in addressing the challenge. And yes, you refer to, I think, the proxy costs that our company uses, and we're public about that, in making our own judgments and our own strategic investment decisions, and it's indeed those investment decisions that has led us to become one of the most significant producers of natural gas in the United States. But I think actually in the OECD, the proxy cost we're using is $40 a tonne. But in any case, it's an important thing. Policies are very important. We expect policies to continue to develop and evolve. We think that they should be uncomplicated administratively. We think they should be transparent. We think that they should remain flexible and be able to respond to evolving climate change science. But it's something that governments should do, and we respect it.
Okay, so let's maybe giving you some time to think about some questions or comments you might like to raise with our panel. Would anyone like to begin from the floor and just over here?
Is my name? Speak working. My name is John Pelaez from Pacific Brands. My question starts with Roy, but broadly for the panel. Firstly, it's great to see companies like yours making a commitment to investment in Australia. My question goes to the point around innovation and the need for investment in new technology, and it touches on a subject that we'll get to in the afternoon session on the advanced manufacturing capabilities in Australia. My question is, what opportunity do you see for companies like yours to make a commitment to developing advanced manufacturing capabilities and services in Australia to support your industry and in fact help Australian companies secure opportunities broadly through your supply chain overseas as a consequence of that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. Actually, there is a process in place now. It's getting better. I think as more projects come into the queue, the process is called the Australian Industrial Participation Process. So it's up to every company that's got major capital projects to communicate out to the manufacturing community, the vendor and service supplier community in general, as to what kind of technology, what kind of manufacturing, what kind of services are going to be required to actually execute the project. So that manifests itself in what we call these local content forums, in which we communicate what we need. And then from that, we develop more specific dialogue with individual companies, organizations, or entities that have perhaps a certain niche technology or manufacturing process that they could lend to the development and execution of the project. So we have got a handful of success cases on this front where that dialogue and that process has yielded cutting-edge manufacturing outcomes. So that is happening. We're getting better at it, as we continue the engagement. So did that answer your question, or were you going another place with it? I can't see who actually asked the question. Oh, okay.
And strength to your elbow.
Okay, thank you.
Martin, do you want to?
Can I just broaden the debate? In some ways, we as a nation focus on too narrow a debate about Australian content. It's just not manufacturing, but you actually look at a major investment such as Gorgon, Wheatstone or whatever. Content is far bigger than manufacturing a component. Just think about the maritime services, the airline services, the preparation of those projects, the financial services, the legal services, the environmental services, the question of the construction camps, the cleaning, the catering, etc. Can also say in some ways I think the manufacturing industry in Australia is too focused on the initial investment. The real long-term opportunities are in the operational stage. You're looking at a plant of 30, 40, 50 years, 3, 4, 5 trains, such as North West Shelf. Think about the opportunities to actually develop our services industry. They're the long-term sustainable jobs in Australia, often high-skilled. The prime example is some people in Western Australia have concerns about a floating LNG plant. Well, that might be the only thing over time that actually keeps us in the game from a competitive point of view. The jobs in a floating LNG plant are very high-skilled and they will be exceptionally well remunerated. That's going to be over a 30, 40-year period. And servicing an offshore plant brings in a whole variety of other essential services beyond just a narrow focus on manufacturing. The manufacturing sector in Australia wants to be very careful about the mandate debate they ran some years ago about it has to be Australian steel. Or be Australian steel if it's competitive and meets our design requirements. If we start trying to impose a mandated requirement on Australian content, then we will not get the initial investment.
Do you want to? Sorry, go on.
Can I just build on that, because several examples that we have is, as Martin points out, it's in our best interest to grow local capability and local capacity while we're in construction, because we're going to be operating this asset for, as Martin mentioned, 30, 40, and even 50 years. And it's in our best interest to have a local company that can support us on many different fronts. So despite some of the skepticism that you hear perhaps maybe on some fronts, we are working hard to grow that capability and capacity. And just several success cases that come to mind, we don't talk about it much, but Barrow Island is a Class A nature reserve. It's under significant quarantine, has a significant quarantine management system. We have grown that capability and that capacity here in Australia. And we have got world-class capability on quarantine systems that can be exported throughout the globe, including to the military. I mean, they're that sophisticated and that good. Other things, subsea technology, flow assurance. I mean, there's countless examples where we have grown the intellectual capacity in either WA or in Australia that will serve to expand local content, not just in manufacturing, but also on an intellectual scale.
Do you want to?
Look, there's nothing I can add on the Australia scene, given that I'm on the dais with someone who runs an Australian business and a former Australian minister. But just on the broad point, and thinking again about our recent experience in Papua New Guinea, I think it's true to say that no matter where you are in the world, ensuring where you can and where it practically works, participation on the part of industry, on the part of the local population is obviously an important thing in ensuring a well-accepted social licence to operate. In the PNG case, we managed to employ 9,000 Papua New Guineans out of a total workforce of less than double that. So, you know, we regarded that as terribly important.
We had a question over here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name's Roger Woodward and I'm a tax practitioner. If Australia is potentially an energy superpower, why are we in debt? And secondly, what went wrong with the mineral resources rent tax?
I'm not going to take that one, Mark.
Who would like to answer that question?
I've said it publicly on numerous occasions. There is a failure of government to actually consult industry over an extended period. It was originally called the Resource Super Profits Tax, the RSPT. There's a Henry tax review. To actually develop a mineral resource rent tax should have been a process of consultation over 6 to 12 months, similar to that which was led by Peter Walsh as the former Resources Minister, then one of Australia's most successful finance ministers. There was a draft proposal put out, detailed consultation, which actually led to the PRRT. And the manner in which it operates means Australia is highly attractive from an investment point of view in the LNG sector. At the same time as we had a debacle about the MRRT, we actually had agreement by industry to actually extend the PRRT from offshore to onshore because we wanted a level playing field. It was a lost opportunity for Australia. Industry actually favoured a profits-based tax. Look what's happened during the downturn of the last couple of years. There actually been increase in state royalties. When you've got low commodity prices, the last thing you should do, and the coal industry is a prime example on the east coast of Australia, with the change of state governments, increase royalties to the detriment of Australia at a time in which we got coal mines closing. So I must say, I'm saying it here today, I said it on numerous occasions. As the Minister at the time, there was a failure by Treasury to actually properly engage with industry and I might say a broader cabinet process. In my opinion, it will be revisited. Will take time. If we can get to a position by which you actually work out a national profits-based tax, abolish the state royalties, then Australia will be even more attractive for investment.
Yeah, I think that issue seems to touch upon, in some sense, the comment that Ian made about domestic and international respective policies in developing resources. I mean, one of the debates in Australia, as you know, is around this question of should we be having some sort of domestic market or domestic reservation or domestic price, where in fact really the debate isn't so much about it should be more about what do we do about the overall benefit of this resource for Australia, whether or not we should then use that to tax as a subsidy for local suppliers or local consumers of gas may be a very different question, but I guess it was interesting, and Martin, as you say, to compare the more recent experience with, I guess, arguably a much more successful outcome of back in the 1980s when the whole thing was first introduced. Now, I think we have a second in the middle here.
My name is Robert Vinson, Emission Traders International. In '95, I was the former electoral secretary to John Howard. I wrote joint papers with Tony Abbott on engaging 200,000 people in growing soil and food in deserts. I also sat on the UN panel of Kyoto, writing the Kyoto Protocol. And we wrote into that it had to be, we put vegetation in the ground for 100 years because that's the life of coal, we determined. My point is here that coal and fossil fuel burning is de facto volcanoes, and the NOx and the SOx that are emitted become life-sustaining nitrates and sulfates. So it's part of the carbon cycle. So by growing food in deserts, and we are currently engaged and waiting for China to sign off on land tenure with the China government for farmers, we're going to do 200 million hectares. We will lower 8 billion tonnes of CO2. My point is that by growing food fodder in deserts, because carbon emissions and nitrate emissions come from 300 years of land clearing of deserts, not the latter day use of fossil fuel. That's still catching up. So we can offset the emissions from industry back into growing food and fodder, because it needs those emissions to grow the food and the fodder and to make soil carbon. So my point is that if we were to work together and understand the bigger picture of the carbon cycle, then industry can offset almost for nothing the cost of its emissions and be a service to the 3 billion people living in poverty in those areas that are deserts for 300 years. My point is, what contribution can the panel consider putting forward to offset their emissions, because they are part of the carbon cycle?
Comment about the way you guys are not thinking about offsets at all?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, currently for Gorgon, I mean, we're not looking at offsets. We decided to, as Martin pointed out, to use technology in this case where the CO2 is naturally occurring with the natural gas in the reservoir. We simply bring it out, we separate it, and we condition it, and then we inject it into a sealed reservoir. I'm sorry?
There's still 300 years up there to be lowered.
Yeah.
Vegetation will do that.
Yeah. So we've elected on Gorgon to use a technology solution versus offsets. Now there are other projects I think in the system that are using offsets as a solution.
There are other projects where similar offsets are used. But the question of the broader use of them is going to come back to the commercialisation of that offset. And that's going to be a question of government policy over time as to whether it becomes a more favoured outcome. And only time will tell. It's not as if the government's only got one approach to offsets. In actual fact, my own personal view, the offset debate should even be further developed in terms of we as a nation have got a huge heritage to preserve. In some ways, offsets just continue to lock up more and more areas of Australia, and there is incapacity to actually look after them, such as our national parks. I personally believe there ought to be fund to which, for example, companies can pay an amount of money as an offset to enable us to actually properly look after what we're locking up, rather than what we do at the moment anyway is neglect it. Or alternatively, you go to a place such as Tasmania, you look at the convict heritage, how can we ever maintain and preserve that wonderful history of Australia without some form of fund which could come, for example, from financial offsets from investment in Australia? We actually should broaden the debate to the issue you raise, but a whole other variety of issues, in my opinion, in terms of the offset debate, rather than just locking up Australia and throwing the gate away and thinking, isn't that good? We've locked up more of Australia that's not available for development. And that's the approach of a lot of the NGOs.
I think it was I think it was the Garno review in 2008 that made the comment that looked at the numbers that were potentially available through various forms of, I guess, what's today called carbon farming. And that remained a significant initiative, Martin, of your government, and also remains one of the areas that the current government has identified as a real potential way of reducing emissions, and also taking advantage of Australia's situation as a supplier of not just resources and energy, but also food to Asia. And I guess the policy framework that will enable that to develop in a robust way is where probably one of the challenges really remains. There's a question here, I think.
Gavin Mount from UNSW Canberra. My question is regarding stakeholders, particularly traditional landowners, and I think my question perhaps directs particularly to Mr. Kemish, but I would like to hear from all of the speakers, if possible, about lessons observed on how best to negotiate this relationship. And do you, particularly Mr. Kemish, envisage any political risk of instability in the region with regards to not only yours, but a range of other resource investment projects And we have seen issues like this in the past within our immediate region. And what could we do to prevent those potential problems?
Yeah, thank you. I'd be very happy to talk about both. As far as stakeholder engagement is concerned, as I began to say earlier, enormously important and frankly underpins the success in very difficult circumstances of our major project in Papua New Guinea. Our approach to stakeholder engagement ranges from support for the Papua New Guinea government's own approach with clan vetting procedures to ensure that revenue goes to those to whom it is owed. It goes to work in support of women's empowerment. It goes to the training of entrepreneurs. I spoke earlier about how many Papua New Guineans we employed. We also, through our enterprise centre, funded by the project, trained 17,000 keen potential business people and entrepreneurs in Papua New Guinea. Our commitment to combating malaria, that's a global policy of ours, as well as education, as well as women's empowerment. These are all things we did fundamentally in Papua New Guinea. Terribly important that those things get done. You ask about instability in the region. It's not something I would wish to play up in the Papua New Guinea case. I would note that, when I think back on my time as High Commissioner there, it coincided. There are two things that come to mind. One is this sort of extraordinary project that was developing alongside, and quite successfully. That was my perspective then too. But the other was that, frankly, I was there for probably the second most turbulent period in Papua New Guinea's political history since independence. It coincided with the period of competition between O'Neill and Somare for the prime ministership. We had, gunshots outside Parliament. We had a long debate that was very difficult about whether to hold an election, and the Australian government very much helped provide the support to ensure that election took place. Notwithstanding all that political instability, all the political stakeholders were united around a view that the project was good for the country and good for national development. And notwithstanding those circumstances, we've got a project that's been executed successfully.
The native title process, in my opinion, is actually working well in Australia. Industry is largely relaxed about it. They know sitting and negotiating with traditional Indigenous owners is part of their, not only a legal requirement, but their social licence to operate. Perhaps more importantly, I actually think government and industry's actually got better at it. The debate has moved on the last decade from a handout mentality to a very sharp focus from the Indigenous community about we want some long-term opportunities, economic opportunities out of these investments. They're looking at training, employment, improvements in housing, education, health, etc. And as a minister, very, very rarely was the issue of native title considerations thrown up as a difficulty. But I can also say for the gas industry now, because of the East Coast, the social licence to operate is far more comprehensive and difficult than just negotiating with Indigenous people. Take Queensland, the coal seam methane industry. You actually got to engage with all those local communities to win broader community support in terms of the development of the project. In terms of our region, and Ian touched on this, I think we're pretty lucky. I only see one project stranded at the moment, and that's the Sunrise project, because of difficulties in Timor-Leste. It's a very good project, and the truth of the matter is Timor-Leste will suffer. There are opportunities out there at the moment to actually develop gas from an LNG export point of view. That project will be stranded because of the attitude of the Timor-Leste government in seeking to direct investors about how they believe the project should be developed, rather than the best commercial option, which is floating LNG.
Well, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, first of all, I guess the industry has evolved tremendously in this space. I mean, if you were to compare what we're doing these days to what we did 30 years ago, it's just not comparable. In any project that's going to be successful, you need to start with grassroots support. Government support's important, but you need to have grassroots support. And it's more than just native title. You need to grow local community support. And my advice always is to our folks is we need to start early, and we need to have frequent engagement as to what's going on, and bring them in and list them in as local community native title holders as key stakeholders in the project, and treat them like you would anybody else, and bring them into what is trying to be done, and listen to what they have to say, and try to address those issues. You have to treat people with respect, and as Martin says, getting the social license to operate, I got to tell you, in some cases, is a lot more important and a lot harder sometimes than getting the permit from the government.
So we are out of time, but we just started a little bit late. And Robert, if I could just interrupt, one gentleman here has been waiting for some little while to ask his question. If you could make it brief, and then we'll...
Certainly,
Yep.
I'll make the question brief. My name is Gordon Flake. I'm the CEO of the Perth U.S. Asia Center. I think the Alliance 21 project has done a magnificent job at broadening the discussion beyond the traditional military security definitions of alliance, but I'd like to bring that back into this panel. Given the fact that as energy companies, your primary markets and the routes to your markets are facing some real tensions right now, I was wondering if you might address briefly the importance of the Australia-US alliance, but also your future expectations or requirements from that alliance given your projections.
Gordon, are you talking from a security perspective?
Yes, sir.
I mean, there's no doubt, as Martin mentioned, we have, $180 billion of investment in flight. And these are going to be operating assets within a matter of just a couple of years. And we are very much aware that they could be considered strategic targets. Not only the plants themselves, but the product that they actually produce and the routes and the paths they take to the customers. So we're in very significant and close engagement with border security on all fronts as to how we maintain our vigilance, if you will, on our stationary assets, and also similar discussions with border security and other parts of government, if you will, on protecting our trade routes.
Okay, so we are out of time. I'm sure we could go on for quite some time. As soon as the conversation gets going, people think of all sorts of other issues to raise, but if you'd like to raise those issues with our three panellists during the coffee break, I'm sure they'd be happy to do so. Can I please ask you to join me in thanking our three panellists?